Hey everybody, it's Ruby here today, and today I would like to do a book review on Voice of Fire by Alan Moore. This is a book that I bought in Northampton, which is where Alan Moore was born and grew up and still lives, as well as the city that this book is actually about. The structure of this book is similar to books that I've read by, I think, Edward Rutherford, where the central idea of the book is a central location told through the eyes of generations of different people through the years, I guess. Therefore, giving people an understanding of the location and a sort of historical fiction way of seeing things. So this one in particular has, I think the first one is 4000 BC, and it goes up to 1995, which is actually Alan Moore talking about himself in sort of a meta-narrative, meta-fiction sort of way. So the concept of the book isn't a new concept, but like Alan Moore usually does, he put his own spin on things. The main theme of this was the theme of reality and fiction, of myth, and sort of how it shapes how we see history. All of the characters in this book have some sort of connection to shamans, witchcraft, religion, or spirituality of some sort. And there's echoes of the previous characters as they're sort of talking to other people. So you'll get, I think they're blue beads from one character in one of the earlier stories that shows up throughout the other stories as well. So there's echoes of people that have lived before them, of a sort of deja vu sort of feeling, whether it's a sense of deja vu or a recurring motif that goes throughout the book. I've always been drawn to his work because he asks the question of why imagination isn't its own concept of reality, and how, because we're already subjective individuals, why that isn't already part of our sort of stories and history and stuff. And that's something that comes up quite a bit in a lot of other books, and it was actually mentioned in The Rule of Metaphor, which is like a philosophical book I had to read that I mentioned in my wrap-up video last week. But he talks about it more explicitly, which I really liked as well. The other really unique thing that he brought to this book was the concept of language. Now, I know that a lot of other authors who do similar sorts of genres will use the use of language as well, so to see how it sort of changes through time. But he also created his own language at the very beginning. So in 4000 BC, in, I think it's called Hogshead, he basically has a character with limited speech patterns and vocabulary, because obviously it's like the start of the language, sort of talking his way through this journey. And so Neil Gaiman, in the introduction of this book, suggested that you actually read it backwards, because it's like a selection of short stories, that you start with the last chapter and go backwards, just because of how hard it is to read the first chapter. And it did take me a month to read this book, just because I was slogging through it and wasn't quite sure if it was worth the effort, but it definitely was at the end. Someone actually did a blog where they translated the first chapter, which I'll link down below as well. It's just super interesting anyways. I'm sure most people, haven't picked up this book. It's not a fairly well-known book, but to just even look at the chapter, I think is kind of cool. But it is definitely worth it to go through that first chapter and be able to read the different versions of identity and reality that each character is going through. Overall, I fell in love with this book. He did an amazing job, which I was slightly surprised by because his genre is usually graphic novels, but he did a great job describing these different areas and people, and getting me into the feeling of the different eras of time. I would give this probably a 4.5 out of 5, almost perfect, but not quite. It's right up my alley when it comes to being gritty, philosophical, historical, and magical. The only thing I'm not sure about, and like that 0.5 that I wasn't sure about, is that I think because it was an ode to Northampton, his hometown, it was sort of a love letter to it. So I think a lot of people who live in Northampton, or who maybe know English towns a little bit more, will have a better understanding of the concept of this book. Just because I think he writes it so that you have the central village that started out, and then it sort of radiates outwards from that. So you get the oldest part in the center and like castles and stuff, which radiates into the suburbs that we know today. But definitely, like, that doesn't take away too much of the book. I just think that that's sort of like the central theme of it, right? Some of the references to his landmarks too, I couldn't quite picture, but they're pretty explicit. So by the end, like the last chapter, and probably one of the reasons that Neil Gaiman also said to read the last chapter first, is that you can actually just like look up what he's talking about anyways. Overall, this was the top book of the year, I'd say, one of the top. I definitely recommend it to any Alan Moore fans, or any fans that, like I said, like philosophical sort of reality warping ideas, or even just like historical fiction, and like to get the sense of sort of English adventures through time, then I would definitely recommend this. So that is everything for today. I hope you guys liked the review. Subscribe if you'd like, comment, like, do your thing, and I will talk to you guys later.